All right, y'all, I want to talk about 5 ways a government shutdown impacts government contractors. Obviously, right, if there's a government shutdown, there's no government operations, right? But that doesn't just impact the government staff. It also impacts the people that support them, the contractors, right? And this isn't something that just impacts the actual contracting companies, but the communities and the overall economy. And the first thing I want to talk about is what happens with the work. Well, there's a couple of things. It depends on the actual contract. If a contract was already funded and approved before the shutdown, then those folks on that contract can continue working. That's one thing. However, if the funding wasn't already approved, if it wasn't obligated, if it wasn't awarded, no work can be done. Let's talk about payments and invoices. So in some cases where the work is still deemed essential, the work can continue and the government can get invoiced, but they're not allowed to process those invoices and give payments. Matter of fact, the Coalition for Government Procurement emphasizes this is one of the top risks. Invoices and acquisition processes freeze until the funding resumes. And then for contractors that have to front the cost, basically, hey, I'll pay you Tuesday for a burger today. That may happen for like travel, materials, labor. This can put a lot of pressure on companies, especially small businesses. Think about those small businesses that are still kind of in their infancy of operations. That can be a lot of stress on businesses. Let's talk about workforce impact. So most definitely expect some furloughs and standby. So agencies have to issue stop work orders, which means the contractors cannot go to work. And unlike the federal employees that are protected under the Fair Treatment Act of 2019, there is no guarantee that there's going to be retroactive back pay. Lost money is lost money. And this is definitely something to consider as a government contractor, someone who may be in the industry already, or you're considering getting in the industry. Make sure you got that rainy day fund for times like this. Let's talk about administrative delays. With no operations, no funds to flow, that will definitely stall RFPs, other solicitations, evaluations, and all awards will be delayed until the agencies reopen. Even for current contracts, no modifications can be processed, so everything stops. Ultimately, that's going to create a bottleneck that once people come back to work, the government at least, they're going to have to start chipping away at those icebergs to move everything through the process to get things flowing again. So let's talk about strategic ripple effects. And the first thing that comes to mind is pipeline disruption. So of course, there are no industry days, there are no bid evaluations, there are no proposal submissions during this time because the government can't operate. So you cannot have any of that going on. Now let's talk about the reputational risk. So this really comes into play when you're talking about companies that primarily do government business, but they may have private sector partners, and those private sector partners may not understand how the government operates. So if there are any like cash flow disruptions, the private sector partners may kind of look at their government sector partners in a different light, just because they don't understand, hey, you know what? Your customer is the government, and if that customer can't pay you right now, of course, there may be some disruption in cash flow. So that can create a disconnect. If you are a private sector industry with no ties to the government, but you may have partners that do, I'll ask you to have a little bit of empathy. There really wasn't anything they could do, right? But we pushed through it. Speaking of pushing through it, let's talk about some diversification pressure. If you're a young company thinking about getting into government contracting, you may want to consider diversifying that portfolio to say, hey, let me keep a foot in the private sector just so that can cover me during the times of government shutdowns. And maybe you're doing primarily government already right now. You may want to consider putting a foot in the private sector just so you have that counterbalance, right? This may even really drive a lot of companies that primarily do business with the government to start looking more out into the private sector. So what's the bottom line? A government shutdown will create some challenges. Issues with obligated funds, only essential missions can continue, but everything else pauses, right? Unlike federal employees, government contractors will definitely feel most of that impact. I would recommend maybe, look out for a neighbor. If you have a neighbor that is in government contracting, if you can help, lend them a little bit of help if you can, right? But ultimately, the best thing to do is to prepare, right? Hope for the best, plan for the worst. Companies, make sure you have those reserve funds. Contractors, the actual people, boots on the ground doing the jobs. I have to reiterate, make sure you have those rainy day funds, because we never know, right? We can't control it, but at least if you plan for it and you have it there, you got something to cover you until we get through the shutdown.